You're listening to audio from the Decidedly podcast. For more information, find us on Instagram at Decidedly Podcast.
You travel so much, Dad, that like people who know you and who know me are always like, they're informing me of where you are.
Because you don't know.
I don't know. I can't keep up.
You learn.
Yeah, they're always like, oh man, your dad's having fun in Scotland, I see. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like I thought I was going to see you this weekend. I guess you're in Scotland, and it's every time it's always the same because they're like, what? You didn't know? How did you not know? And I'm like, well, if your dad was in a foreign country every 3 weeks, like you'd stop keeping track at some point. So I don't really keep track. But this time you were in Scotland. I actually did know you were in Scotland. And I actually even knew why you were in Scotland. Yeah. Which is unique that I know the location and the reason at the same time. But you were hiking. And so that was one that like I remember more because that's cool to me.
The hiking part?
Well, and specifically the long distance hiking.
Yeah, we went to do the West Highland Way, which is about 100 miles from north of Glasgow straight up to a place called Fort William, which is sort of at the base of the Highlands. Yeah, so it's awesome. In fact, I took my bedrocks that you're wearing.
The sandals.
I didn't hike any of the official West Highlands, but I did some hikes around Skye and other parts of.
They're pretty killer sandals.
I like them. I kind of, thought you were a little goofy for wearing them so much.
Well, it might still be true,
but you might be goofy for a lot of other reasons, but not since I own some now. Not for that reason. That one's taken off the table.
There's a lot of things that I try to convert people on, and this might be the only thing I've been successful at. These stupid sandals. I got like 5 guys buying these sandals.
Is it right?
Yeah, people that work here, friends of mine. I mean,
but I liked hiking barefoot, so I hiked.
It's good
on Skye.
So your toe and your foot mobility really matters. You're wearing shoes that like keep your toes together all the time. Well, then you're not using the muscles in your feet, the grit to use the toes to grit.
There is a lot to that. So I saw a guy hiking. I did some hiking about a month ago. I was in Colorado Springs hiking to the Garden of the Gods, and there was a guy hiking in front of me. I could not get away from. Sometimes when you're hiking, there are people that are just in your orbit. You can't get away from them.
They're on cruise control, like 1 mile an hour behind you.
That is the most annoying thing in the world when you're hiking is somebody who's hiking 99% of your pace in front of you.
Yeah.
Right? Because you have to slow down your pace. Now you're right up on them.
You can't really pass them.
Well, not without a lot of effort. That's the problem. Is you've got to go 110% of your pace to get around them. And then you can't just stop.
No, you got to go out of sight.
You got to get way ahead of them. You don't want to be that person. So it's just super annoying. I found that I am annoyed by people hiking in front of me on the trail, but also people that come behind me on the trail.
And you're there slowpoke.
They're hiking 105% of my pace, right? So it just came to the realization I don't like people on the trail.
Yeah, you maybe just don't like people.
Well, maybe I hate to come to that realization.
Something to work on.
But you've done some hiking. You hiked up and you were doing one of the 14ers in Colorado.
We were kind of hiking at the same time, I guess. So the 14ers in Colorado the 14er refers to the elevation. So they're 14,000 feet in elevation. They're not necessarily 14,000 feet from base to peak, but of elevation. And Colorado has more than any other
sea level, as they say. Yeah.
They have more than any other state in the country, including Alaska. So they're in the 50s. Alaska like 27 or something. 29.
Oh, no kidding. I didn't know that.
And Colorado's almost double that. Okay. And then it's like everybody else is way below 20.
Okay.
Way below 20, if even double digits. And so Colorado has the most, very dense, it's the most densely mountainous area in the Rockies. Uh-huh. The reason that some of them are disputed is because people have differences of opinion on what level of distance there needs to be in the saddle, like how much separation between two peaks that are close together. Right?
Okay.
So if this one's at 14,001 and then you go down 100 feet and come back up a tenth of a mile later to 14,000.
Is that 2 peaks or just one?
Yeah. Is it one jagged peak or is it 2? And people have differences of opinion, and I don't know all the rules.
If I'm ticking them off the list, I want them to be 2 separate things.
Yeah. Well, so then you say they're 58. Or if one of them's really hard, you say maybe there's 57.
Right.
That one doesn't count. That's BS.
Yeah, we're not doing that one.
Yeah, you get to you might have thought there were 58 until you got to the top. And then you said there's 57. So I've done a few that are like questionable. Some people don't say they're legit.
The saddles.
Yeah, they're like, that's not legit. That's just one. But whatever.
Okay.
They have a name. Who really cares? Like, it's
Right.
just a fun thing to do.
I figure if they're making a patch for it, it counts.
Yeah. So I really enjoy them because there was a time like in college where there was this thing that I realized, which was I hadn't done anything in my life that was like super difficult or I'd done a lot of difficult things, but I had not done
other than just get through middle school without being made fun of.
Well, I failed at that. I didn't succeed at that at all, actually. Famously failed.
Okay.
So there were a lot of maybe challenging things I had done, but they were at your prompting or they were not voluntary. So I was like, I want to do something that's 100% my choice that I picked and I voluntarily did, and it was hard. And so I don't know what made me think I should hike a mountain. I was like, I'm going to go climb mountains. And I started looking and I was like, oh, you can actually can do that in Colorado. So I went up there one summer by myself. I did like 8. And
that's a lot.
It was a lot. And everybody who I talked to, including family who lives in Colorado, was like, you're psychotic for this. This is actually super hard. And I said, oh, well, I guess I like it. So I'm going to keep doing it. So every year I at least do one now a year. They're very challenging. It's difficult. And it's an opportunity to be in nature for a prolonged period with a goal. And that's what motivates me. Like I'm not going to do very well if I'm sitting in nature, like meditating for 12 hours. I'm probably not going to do that. I'm going to get bored. I'm going to be like, come on. Can I get on my phone? Can I go back into town and get some smoothies? Like, I don't really want to do that. But hiking, there's nothing to do. Like, I just got to get to the top.
Right.
I can't not focus. I can't not be present.
There's kind of an end point on that.
You just got to keep going. Yeah. So the goal like serves as a purpose for this other thing that's more important. Like to me, it's not really about getting to the top. Right. It's about, I want to be in nature. I think that's one of the ways that God reveals himself to us is in his creation. And so you can experience God in a way by being in nature in a pure way and for a prolonged period of time. So I'm not going to do that without a goal. Like I need a goal because I'm a goal-oriented person. Other people might not, or the goal might make them not want to experience it.
Sure.
For me, the goal is helpful. And I imagine like some of that is really similar to the long distance hikes.
It is. There's a termination point when you do through hikes. For example, if you do the Camino, there are multiple places to
the Camino
start
in Spain.
In Spain, right? So the Camino de Santiago terminates in Spain. So it's a 1,000-year-old pilgrimage. It's kind of started by the Catholic Church, as the Pope would or the bishops would suggest people do that. Yeah, you want to tell me about it?
I'm sure
you're looking at me because I don't know anything about Catholicism.
Okay, this is like I love this story because when you did it in 2014
and 2015.
Yeah, I didn't know. I didn't even know it was really Catholic. I thought it was just this Christian thing. And a lot of people who are out there, some of them are Christian, some of them are not. It's not like explicitly a Christian.
It's not exclusively a Catholic.
It's certainly
Catholic
not exclusively a Christian. But so the Apostle James' remains are buried at the Cathedral in Santiago de Compostela, which is in northwestern Spain. That's the end goal of the hike. So during the Middle Ages, when the Muslims were kind of conquering, invading the Iberian Peninsula, the Catholic Church was like, well, we got a couple problems here. One is like, this was Catholic land and we're getting overrun. So how do we reconquer it in a non-confrontational way? Well, like step one is we have to have a presence there. We have to have Christians there. Yeah. Well, so what's one way we can have Christians there and we can justify having our military there without it being aggressive? Oh, well, we could send people on this pilgrimage. So they're sending these people on the pilgrimage did a few things. One, now there's more people. Two is they can put the guards at different points.
Knights Templar.
And say, hey, no, they're not here. We're just protecting our people. That's why we're here. And then three is it helped the economy of all of the towns along the way, just like it still does today.
And they've set up, there are 3 cathedrals along the way different from just, the regular chapel. And so there's one in Burgos, one in Leon, and one in Santiago de Compostela.
So what it became was a penance. Like if you would go confess your sin today, you go confess your sins, the priest will give you absolution. You are forgiven. So he is acting in persona Christi and saying through the power of Christ, your sins are forgiven. He's also going to give you a penance. Now your penance is not required in order to receive absolution, but it's like a recommended atonement for your sins. So a good example might be if you go, oh my gosh, I stole money and I've been greedy. Okay, well, you could give money to the church. Like that would be a pretty good way to like work that out of you,
Seems a little self-serving to do that.
Yeah, but I mean, they may say it does, but if he's not probably going to say that if you said, I've been a glutton or, I was too prideful. So they'll find something. Now, in the past, it used to be a lot more involved. And, back in the Old Testament, when Jews were confessing their sins, they would have to do so publicly. Publicly, you'd bring a sacrificial animal through the town. Everyone knew, man, and they knew what your sin was. Well, now it's one-on-one with the priest. It's private, but it used to be your penance would be a lot bigger deal. Now, your penance might be like say the Our Father prayer. Like it's not even that big a deal.
Okay.
Anyway, the penance would be walk to Santiago de Compostela.
Okay. To the relics of St. James. Yeah.
Walk there from your house.
Right. Yeah.
Even you're a German guy.
Right.
You got to walk from Germany to Northwest Spain. And by the way, you're walking back because there's no plane to get on.
I never thought of that. You do have to.
You got to walk back. That's crazy.
Maybe that's how they settled Santiago. It turned it into a city. People just did it.
Like, I ain't doing it again, man. I'm done.
I think I'll set up camp
So
here.
I think that's like, there's this, that's why there's a web of trails. There's not one trail.
Right.
There's all these different trails because.
And they're different. There's no defined starting point.
Because your starting point was your house.
It's wherever you were. Yeah.
So imagine you're at the local cathedral. You're like, dude, I really messed up. Like I stole from my neighbor, I broke my word. I've been cheating on my wife, whatever. And they're like, get walking, bud.
Do you think people that live just sort of on the edge of town of Santiago sort of had a free pass?
They were going crazy.
Didn't have to walk very far.
Yeah, they were just complete degenerates.
There's an interesting thing. If you walk that trail, that you'll notice people who, and my sister is on the trail right now as we're talking. Which is kind of interesting.
With her husband, family's
David.
From Spain.
Yeah, he's from the Basque region originally. His family is. So it's kind of interesting. There will be a shell tied to the outside, kind of a scallop shell. And the idea was that you walk this journey, you don't bring any food with you.
Yeah.
You don't bring any water with you, but that the trail will provide. And what you learn is that shell, people would fill up with wine or grain, and it was just enough to sustain you
for
that day. And so people could give that grain to you. And what you'll find along that trail is that if you go into it with that attitude that the trail will provide, it will. There are people along the trail who consider it a blessing to assist you, and people will go out of their way if they sense that you're lost or in need or something like that.
That's so cool that like ethos remains for thousands of years. That was how it had to be.
It had to be that way.
You couldn't bring Cliff Bars back in the day. No. You had to rely on people, and the people who were supporting those who were hiking. You weren't if you were in that position, you lived in this little town, people came through every day. You weren't supporting Sean on his hike. You were supporting Sean on his Christian penance. And by doing that, supporting the growth of the church, you were supporting the faith more broadly. Like you were supporting something that was so much bigger than you or even the individual that you were.
Yeah, it's helping. Still, even that ethos still carries through to a lot of the businesses along the Camino. There is a winery outside of Pamplona where they do the running of the bulls. And in the back of the winery, you go around to the back, there is a spigot.
Wow,
and the spigot, out comes wine.
Free wine.
And from that winery, so if you want something to drink, they kind of ask you not to abuse it, but but you can get a little wine and then on your way. So it's
that's super cool.
Yeah, it is.
So the West Highland Way what's the history of that? Because not every long distance hike has this cool story.
Yeah,
Some of them are just public trails.
There is not the spiritual overlay to it. It is more of just a hike. I'm not sure how it started, other than it may have been just a Scottish trail as they move people along. There were some roadways or trails that were built by the British military. Now, when I say that, I'm talking British military in the 1700s.
Yeah.
Is so that they could capture Jacobite rebels who were supporting King James the Second. I'm probably going to get that wrong, but trying to actually, get them out of the country and capture them. So there are some parts where you're hiking through trails that were put in several hundred years ago by the British. And so there's a lot of that as it just kind of moves through, and it may have been sort of a trade route for moving, goods and things like that. But you start in, as I said, just north of Glasgow, a town called Milguy. And I learned a lot. So I went with your mom and two friends, and both women. And so that was an interesting, so it was me and three ladies which, as I told you, it's kind of like going on a long road trip, and you can only use a certain brand of gas. And every time you stop for gas, which is a lot, you have to disassemble and reassemble the car. And so there's a lot of that, a lot of.
What do you think their complaint was about you?
Oh, I can't imagine they would have any. What are you talking about? No, I don't say this as a complaint. I'm just saying that there are different ways that people want to approach hiking, like the same way different ways people want to approach life. And so there are, our lights just went out. You want to?
Yeah, they're motion detected. Just stand up for a second and go over there. But yeah, that's all you have to do. Just raise your hand. So there's different ways people go about it.
Well, I think that's what you're signing up for. If you hike solo, you know how you operate. You can stop when you want. You can do whatever you want, take whatever lunch you want, take whatever detour you want, go as fast or slow as you want. When you hike with a group, there are pros and cons to that. One of the things I learned, there was a saying that I had heard, and it really comes true when you do a long distance through hike, whether it's Camino, West Highland Way, PCT, whatever it is, that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with a group. Yeah. And that rings so true, not just in hiking, but in business, in training.
I remember you telling me this when I was thinking about starting Decidedly. You want to go fast, go on your own. You want to go far, go together. And I was like, oh, I want to go fast.
You do want to go fast, but there's so
a downside.
much
you don't have the support. You don't have the camaraderie. Right. When you're feeling down, who's going to push you and say, look, come on, let's keep going.
Right. And so I think that there's a lot to gain from that phrase that if I'm hiking with, three other people, they're going to want to stop and take pictures. They're going to want to stop and, fix their gear. They're going to want to stop because a shoelace broke or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or they slipped in the water and got hurt and they need attention. There are all those things that if you're not the one who needs that attention or that support or that help, you go, it's irritating. Like, I'm going along. But if you are, that's helpful. Like it could very well be you're the one that slipped in the creek or forgot your lunch or, lost your water gear or whatever it is. So I think there's something to it is that you just embrace that this is the journey I'm on with other people.
And if you are at the top of the mountain and all your friends are 45 minutes behind you, it's not as fun. It's just not quite as fun. Like it's always tempting to me when I'm in a group to go, oh, come on, I'll meet y'all at the top, because then I can sit down and I can rest. I'd rather do that than take 5 minutes. Yeah. But there's something so cool when we do get to the top and I look over at this guy who has been struggling. He's like, oh, I made it.
Yeah.
That's so much more fun than me getting there by myself.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because there are two things that stuck in my head as I did it that seem contradictory, but I don't think that they really are. One is that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go in a group.
Yeah.
The other phrase that sort of stuck in my head is hike your own hike. And when I heard that phrase, it was originally in a context of sort of a mind your own business.
At least that's what you thought.
That's what it seemed like. That's what the person was conveying.
Okay.
In other words, oh, look at that person. They're hiking with headphones. They shouldn't hike with headphones. Hike your own hike.
Yeah.
Mind your own business. Let them do their thing. Or they're going so fast and not looking around. Well, that's what they want to do. Yeah. Mind your own business. Hike your own hike. Let them do their own thing. And that's how I took it for a long time. And then there was a time where I met up with some other hikers and they wanted me to hike with them. And so I agreed, and I quickly realized that they were just on a different pace than me. They were moving a lot faster than me. And it was becoming detrimental to my experience and my enjoyment to try and keep pace with them. And that phrase then kind of came back to me, hike your own hike. Don't let other people sort of impact what you're trying to do. So if you're, you're trying to build your business that you want, and I've been subject to this in larger corporations where they're interested in growth, as a big corporation is. Oh, you should grow. You should, hire more people, get more clients, get bigger, better, faster,
for the
stronger.
sake of it. Yeah. For the sake of growing.
Right. Yeah. And, eventually I'm like, you know what? I want to do something different. Maybe I want to keep this income and work less time, or spend more time with these kind of people, or not do this kind of product line. And so I think there's
people get confused. Like, you should always be seeking to improve, but that does not necessarily always mean growing my top line revenue.
It doesn't always mean hire more people, and and all that doesn't.
That it could. That's it's hard to do that without improving,
right?
But you can improve in another way,
right?
And I can't stand when that certain messaging is ignorant of any other possible way to improve. So it's all grow, get bigger, get bigger, get bigger, get bigger, and at Decidedly, one of our core values is seek constant progress. It's not seek constant growth, it's seek constant progress. Sometimes we may intentionally shrink, but we're progressing towards something that's meaningful to us. The priest at our parish, he gave a homily of maybe a year ago where he was saying, he's got this Scottish accent, funny enough. And he was like, we had just experienced a lot of growth. And he said,
at the church?
Yes. Okay. Like, gone, it's still fairly small, but gone from maybe like 700 a week to 1,000 a week, that's
okay.
Big growth. Almost a 50% growth.
50% growth.
And he was saying, hey, look, like if you're here and you're not committed, like you're not going to be involved, you're not going to support the parish and what the parish needs, you're halfway here, you're not really all in, just get out of the way.
Oh, wow.
He goes, you need to leave, because he said, bigger isn't always better. We're growing and that's fine, but that's not always good. If I gain 300 people, but 270 of them have a bad attitude, are apathetic, or aren't involved. Well, now the group's worse.
Have you heard, I may not get the company right, I think it's Zappos, where they'll hire somebody, and a week after they're hired, they'll meet with them and said, hey, we will give you $5,000 right now just to quit.
Wow.
And some people take it and they're like, good.
Yeah.
That person wasn't committed to what we're doing, to being on our team, to advancing through the company. And they would just pay them and they'd be gone.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a test.
That takes
some guts.
Guts to stick with doing that.
Yeah, it does.
Because
after the first time you get burnt, you had to pay $5,000 for Sally to leave, and you're like, oh man.
And I'm sure at least a few times you go, oh no, Sally's leaving. No, but Sally's really good. Come on. No, stay, please stay. I'll give you $4,000 if you stay. Whatever. Like that, because I think of that. If I asked everybody, I don't think anyone would take it. I hope not. But if there's people that if they did, I'd go, oh, just kidding.
Well, I think that's one of the things that I learned on the hike, because we're talking about that, is that human connection really makes a difference. I found that along that journey, if I'm with the right people, the journey becomes effortless. If I'm just walking down the trail and I'm by myself, it can get monotonous. It can get difficult. You get in your own head, so to speak, right? But you can walk down the trail, and if you're talking with somebody, you can begin to have these discussions that take you out of the moment of the work of progressing. The hard work of the hiking is you're now focusing on those connections. I was hiking with Stephanie, who's on the Camino right now. And we would get into these stories about when we were kids, or, what she did in college, things that we just hadn't really explored before. And we would call them trail stories because they would go, you had the absence of the distractions of nobody was calling you. There was no cell service.
You're not constrained by time.
You're not constrained by time. You didn't have to be anywhere. You didn't have to do anything. There was nothing on the radio you were going to hear. There was nothing, no meeting you had to go to. You had all day just to connect and end up going from point A to point B. And I think a lot of that is true in business. Is it matters who you bring onto your team. It matters who you're traveling with, not just travel with somebody, but travel with the right people who are, and building those connections, I think, is important.
That is super important. And I think it's highlighting another thing that we've talked about on the show before. And I talk about with all of the people on our team and our clients at Decidedly a lot, which is that the goal is not the end all be all. Like, the goal isn't anything other than a measure toward our aim, right? So if I'm doing the Camino, if I'm hiking the Camino, I have a goal, right? I'm going to hike from here to here, and it's going to be 500 miles. And maybe there's even a range of time that I want to complete it in. Yeah. But that's not the point of what I'm doing. The point of what I'm doing is to have a spiritual growth experience, to connect with God through his creation, to deepen my relationship with my sister who I'm hiking with. Like, there's all these other things that are more important than the goal. And conceivably, I could achieve these and fail the goal. Right?
Yes.
But if I'm not moving toward that goal at all, I'm probably not going to achieve these. People sometimes get, and I think this is very easy in business, to get consumed with the goal. It's all about the goal. Well, the goal is so that we know we're moving in the right direction. If I end up in Spain and I start walking and I have no goal and no map and no direction, who knows where I'm going to end up.
Right.
And in the process, I may have made the experience worse. I may have not connected with God at all because I went through this ugly route that, wasn't beautiful nature. I'm frustrating and bickering with my sister, so we're not connecting. I'm not achieving what I wanted. I'm not moving toward what I wanted. But I could go hike 482 miles and then I roll my ankle. Did I fail? I didn't achieve the goal, but I still did the three primary things that I was aiming at.
Yeah, I think what I learned along those lines is that the journey is the reward. It's not the completion of the trail. In other words, when you get to the end of a long through hike, so when I did the Camino, the first time I did about 500 miles. And it took me about a month. Yeah. And I remember vividly, I got up in the morning because I had some, just energy, and I kind of got up. And then, also there was this jerk in the hostel who was kind of making noise at 3:30 in the morning, and I couldn't sleep. Yeah. So it was one of those. So I just got up at 3:30 in the morning, put my boots on, grabbed my pack, and off I went.
Yeah.
3:30, so I had a headlamp. I'm hiking in the dark by myself, and it was peaceful. Nobody was out there. And as a consequence, I ended up rolling into Santiago before the city woke up. Yeah. It's like you kind of enter in the outskirts of town, and you kind of walk for almost an hour in the city before you get to the cathedral, which is kind of in the heart of the city. And so the city was still asleep. I mean, nobody was up, no cars, no horn, nothing. So I'm walking through the city, and I finally get to the cathedral, and you kind of enter from the back of the cathedral, and you kind of go through this archway, and you emerge into this giant square, and the cathedral sort of dominates that square, and you get there. And so I kind of walk through this archway, and I walk out to the middle of the square, and I'm not the only person there. And I turn around and I look at the cathedral, and what I'm expecting is sort of that feeling you get when you cross the finish line at a marathon. Right. Sort of this, applause, kind of pump my fist and somebody high fives me or what. There's none of that. And what I felt was this feeling. Do you remember as a kid how you feel Christmas Day in the afternoon?
Yes.
Not in the morning, not Christmas morning.
You're like, oh, that was
in the afternoon. You're like, it's over.
Yeah.
Like all that, this thing I've been anticipating, this excitement that I've been thinking about for a month.
Yeah.
It just happened. Now it's over. And what you want is to go back in time.
Start over.
to the morning and wake up and have that experience again.
Yeah.
Right. And what I wanted was to keep hiking. What I wanted was to be transported back to the beginning and start over and do it again. And that wasn't anything I experienced, or that I was expecting, rather. And what I learned was that the reward wasn't finishing the hike. The reward was the hike. Just what you learn along the way. Not just the beauty of the scenery, not just the views you get or the pictures you take, but the person you become who's done that, the learnings that you get that now have relevance to you, the connections that you made that helped you or taught you something.
It's the physical, the spiritual, the mental, the emotional transformation that's occurring. I felt the same way when I finished the second Ironman. My goal for a year was I want to do 2 in a 3-week period. When I completed the first one, I felt pretty good because I still had one more. When I finished the second one, I had dreamed for a year of how excited it's going to be when I cross the finish line. And like, I didn't. I kind of was like, well, that's a bummer. Yeah, that's it. That's over.
Because that isn't the reward.
Yeah, it wasn't the reward. So I think that's true with business too. And that's why a lot of people end up killing their own sale when they want to sell a business, is that represents like the finish line. And they don't really know, like I didn't know when I finished my Ironman, what am I going to do Monday morning?
Yeah.
Because I used to train every Monday morning, every Monday afternoon, every Tuesday morning, every Tuesday afternoon. And I knew what I was doing. This effort, it had a great purpose. And now that's gone. So what am I going to do Monday morning? And I think a lot of guys, when they get to selling their business, they're really close to it. They're at the finish line and they go, what am I going to do Monday morning? They've been daydreaming about crossing the finish line, raising their hands, getting the photo, getting the medal. And they realize once they're about to taste that, oh, that's not going to do it for me. That's not going to fulfill me. I have no idea what I'm doing Monday morning now. And so in order to move through that quote unquote finish line appropriately and with confidence, like you do have to know what you're going to be doing Monday morning. In other words, you have to know what you're going to be doing with your life. Where are you getting social connection? Where are you getting meaning and purpose? You've spent decades working on something. It doesn't mean you have to continue to work to earn a living, but we're made by God to work. And if you're working on nothing, it's not going to last very long. You can only golf and lay on the beach for so many months before you go crazy. And I see that hold people back a lot. They tell me they want to sell. Maybe they even probably should sell. And they find some reason. Oh, that guy who was going to buy, he's not trustworthy, whatever.
Right.
Well, I don't know.
Couldn't get the right price.
Yeah. He wasn't charging me enough. That's twice as much money as you need to live on. What are you talking about? It doesn't really matter. All these, they find these kind of like ticky-tack reasons. And that's hard to do, like I say, with empathy, because that's very difficult. The longer you've spent in the business, the more of an identity that is, for you ending the hike, it's like I'm now moving on from something that consumed the 24/7 of 6 weeks of my life. But it's not like, a professional athlete who basketball has been their identity since they were 5 years old.
Yeah.
Or an entrepreneur who this specific business has been everything since they were 24.
Right.
It's not quite the same. So it's very difficult to do that, but it's still necessary to do that.
Yeah. I think it requires a lot of self-awareness to realize that the journey is the reward, not the finish line, so that you're soaking in what those learnings, what that experience should be teaching you. I had heard years ago that the person with the knowledge is always at the mercy of the person with experience.
Yeah.
And and what it taught me was go out and seek those experiences that I can learn something from, that I can bring into relevance from business. So if you go hike, you'll learn some things about hiking. But what a waste, what a shame if you don't learn some things about life and translate those into how you approach your business.
And all you have to do is have an open mind and heart to that experience.
Yeah, I'll tell you.
Because it will be there.
I'll tell you one. I was hiking up Mount San Jacinto in California. It was early in the season, so it was late May, early in the hiking season. So there was still snow above about 7,000 feet and up. There was snow. And so I'm hiking along. So trail was sort of hard to decipher, see these tracks. And I like, oh, good. That makes placing my foot easier because the snow is packed down. So I just kind of start cheating and I'm just tracking this person's steps. I'm just putting my foot in their
that you never experienced it. That's like twice as easy.
It makes it so much easier.
Yeah.
I'm not having to, not having to post hole, where your foot just sinks down in the snow.
Yeah.
So I'm following these tracks. I'm looking for the cutoff for the trail. And so I'm just following these tracks. And if you hike a lot, what you'll find is that you get very familiar with the essence of a trail. You sort of know what the trail should be, right?
Yeah. Even if you've never been there before.
Yeah. You just sort of, this feels like the trail I should be on. I'm going along, and after a while, I start to lose that feeling. I'm like, oh, this feels off. The sun is in a different spot.
Yeah.
The mountain, is sort of approaching you differently. The views aren't kind of what they should be. And so I stopped and I took out my map and sort of said, okay, let's see where I am. Well, I was way off the trail. And I was like, oh man, and I could see that I had missed the trail.
Yeah.
Of the turnoff. And so now I have to hike back. I got to turn around. I got to reverse, these footprints and go way back. And so I go back and I realize why I had missed the turnoff. And it was because I was hiking in the snow. But when you're hiking in the snow, you're really hiking on the snow.
Yeah.
And if the snow is 4 feet deep, you're hiking 4 feet higher than the ground, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So if they put a little post in the ground that has an arrow on it for the trail, if that post is 4 feet tall, you're only seeing the top of that post.
Yeah.
You don't see the post.
Yeah.
And so I found the post. I found the sign that was for the turnoff, but it was only just barely sticking out of the snow because I was up on top of the snow. And so I stopped right there and I wrote down in my journal that I was keeping, I wrote down 2 things. One of them I wrote down, look for the hidden signs. So be aware, have your eyes open, your ears open, your heart open to what that journey is trying to teach you, because you might miss it if you're not mindful, if you're not looking. So I wrote that down. And then the next thing I wrote down is be careful who you follow.
Yeah.
Right? They might be lost. Or they might be going somewhere different than where you are.
Or you don't even know who they are.
I don't even know who they are.
In that case, you're following someone.
I was just following tracks,
Yeah.
right? I didn't know if that person was lost. I didn't know where that person was going. I just was blindly sort of following. So know who you're following, know why you're following them, and look for hidden signs. And so I wrote those down. And that was just on the journey on that day that I learned those things from hiking a trail. And I started to apply that to life. I started to apply that to business. And there was another day on the West Highland Way. We hiked for about 8 days. And the last day I think was like 17 miles. But the day before the last day was only about 13.
Okay.
And it rained all day. And I'm not talking it was off and on rain.
Yeah.
I'm talking it was constant rain for the whole day. It never let up. Sometimes it got harder and more, but it never stopped.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going. I hiked my own hike. I said, I'll meet you guys in the town. Right. I'm just going to go. And so I broke off from the group and I said, I'm just going to hike. And the learning that I got that day, because it was cold, it was windy, it was rainy.
Yeah.
Is just embrace the suck.
Yeah.
Right. I kept sort of thinking that I can't control this rain. I can't do anything about the rain. Just embrace that it's going to suck. So I just started hiking, which meant the trails were puddles, right?
Yeah.
There was water in the trail. So I would just hike through the water. I stopped trying to go around it. I tried trying to avoid it. I would just go through it. Feet wet. My feet are going to be wet. My feet are already wet.
Yeah.
I'm just going to embrace it. I'm already getting rainy. I'm just embracing it. And so I started embracing this hardship, this uncomfortableness.
You can kind of come to enjoy that hardship.
What I found was as I was doing that, people who haven't hiked, you're not going to appreciate this.
Yeah.
I couldn't slow down.
Yeah.
I felt like there was a invisible hand sort of pushing me from behind.
Yeah.
Moving. I started jogging.
Yeah.
I don't jog.
Yeah.
On a 12 mile, I'm just jogging along through the rain, through the mud.
Not because you're trying to get it over with.
No, that's not it. I'm not like, home is around the corner. I mean, hurry up and get out of the rain. There was no getting out of the rain. It was just, I was just being moved along at a pace that I normally wouldn't go. And once I just started embracing the hardship rather than complaining about it, oh, it's raining, this sucks, my feet are wet and all that, there's a lot to complain about. I can't see the views because we're in the clouds and I'm missing all, this sucks, no pictures today, all that. I could have complained about a lot of things and I just, this is what it is. And I started moving along. It
kind of becomes funny. The misery kind of becomes enjoyable. Yeah. It's like, oh, there's snow here now. I didn't expect the snow. This is going to stink. I'm post-holing. That's funny. Like, of course, of course, this is going to just be so much worse than I thought. I have that same attitude. It helps so much. Like before my son was born, I told myself I'm never going to complain about being a parent because I couldn't stand when other people would do that. I said, well, I'm not going to complain to anyone. I'm not going to complain to my wife. I'm not even going to complain to myself in my own head. And so sure enough, like he's a week old, changing his diaper, he poops, it shoots across the room, lands on the wall. It's like, well, that's hilarious. Like that would have made me so mad, before, but
it'd make you mad. Like if I did it,
I would, I don't know. That'd be pretty funny. But, it was something to say, hey, this is what it is. That's hilarious, actually. Yeah. And I cleaned it up like with a smile on my face because what else am I going to do? Just let it ruin my day.
Yeah, embrace it.
Well, I think that's everything that we can say about hiking.
Is that everything?
Close to it.
Those are the things I learned. Hey, I just got back yesterday from that. So it was a lot of learnings and a lot of good connections. And
that's good.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do the West Highland Way. I don't know. Maybe not. I'll be on a hike one day and I'll do it again and I'll learn more.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Decidedly Podcast. To be notified when new episodes are released, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And while you're there, drop us a 5-star review because it helps more people defeat bad decision-making right alongside you. For show notes, decision-making insights, more episodes, and links to resources mentioned in this episode, check us out at decidedlypodcast.com. If you'd like us to help you make a decision, leave us a message at decidedlypodcast.com/makemydecision for a chance to have your question featured in an upcoming episode. For more decision-making content, check us out on Instagram or Facebook at Decidedly Podcast. As always, thanks for listening. This is Decidedly.